Hi there, I'm Pamela Salzman with the Kitchen Matters blog, and today we are going to be making one of my favorite desserts, an apple galette. And this one is a little bit more special because I'm adding some salt to the top, and we're also going to add some pecans into the crust, which makes it really warm and nutty, super delicious. So a galette is actually just a free-form pie or tart. It's only one crust, so it's a few less calories, but it's also a little bit easier to make as well. So let's get started on the crust first. Right here I have some toasted pecans, and you can see that they're a little bit darker than they would be raw. That's kind of your indication that they are toasted and fragrant, and they just taste so much better that way. So I put these into the toaster oven just in a simple pie plate for about 10 minutes. Anything from 10 to 15 is usually fine, but just make sure they don't burn because then they'll taste super bitter. So they go into the food processor once they've been cooled. Now the key with pastry is to make sure everything is nice and cold. So if you put warm pecans out of the oven into your food processor and then you start trying to make your dough, it's just going to make everything melt, and that is not good. So make sure they are fully cooled. I'm going to pulse these up just until they are nice and crumbly and like it's more like a course meal. So okay, that looks perfect. Now we don't want to turn it into nut butter, so you don't need to go that long, but that's kind of what you're going for. I also like to just take my spatula and scrape any nuts that are sort of clinging to the side here, because we want everything to be really well incorporated. So got the nuts nice and crumbly, and then we're going to be adding in some flour. Really, the best flour to use in pastry is white flour. I'm sorry, it just is. It tastes better because it's more neutral and it's way easier to roll out. So this is basically a special occasion dessert. You can use white all-purpose flour or you can use white spelt flour, same amount. So we'll put in 1 cup plus an extra 2 tablespoons. And then we're going to add in a little bit of cane sugar, just 2 teaspoons, half a teaspoon of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And we're going to pulse these up before we add in our butter and our water, just to make sure everything is well incorporated. Perfect. Okay, you don't see any butter or ice water out here right now because I always keep those in the fridge until I'm ready to use them. Otherwise, they can start to get warm, and like I said before, everything needs to be cold. So I'm gonna head over to the fridge and pull out my butter that has already been diced up. Okay, be right back. Okay, so you want to cut your butter into small squares like that. Just use unsalted, good quality organic butter. So little squares like that, and I will put this into our flour and pecan mixture, just like so. And then we're gonna pulse this just like 5 times maybe. Perfect. So you want the butter to actually be in like little small pieces like that, maybe about the size of a pea or smaller. We are not trying to cream it and make everything smooth and homogeneous. We actually want little pieces of butter because it will make the pastry more flaky. So this is good, and now I'm going to just measure out 3 tablespoons of ice water. Now I'm going to give you a range in the recipe of between 3 and 4 tablespoons because you just never know. Sometimes it could be more humid in the environment that you're working in. It could be that your flour is a little drier or more moist depending on where it's stored. So it's always good to just start out with less water, and you can always add more later. So I'm literally just going to take the ice water and pour it right over the butter and flour mixture. Put the top back on the food processor and pulse it again until it starts to come together. You don't want to just press on, you just want to use the pulse button on your food processor. Quick little pulses. Great, you can see that the dough is just starting to come together. It doesn't look dry anymore. One way that you can actually determine whether or not this is actually a dough that's ready to be, molded and put into the fridge is carefully, I'm going to take the blade out because you don't want to cut yourself, carefully take a handful of this dough and see if you can squeeze it together and if it holds this shape. Perfect. If it were like kind of crumbling and falling apart and sort of dusty and floury, you probably need to add a little bit more water. Just start with 1 or 2 teaspoons. But this looks really good. Woo! Flying dough. Okay, so we're going to scoop out all of this, and I'm going to then allow this to rest in the refrigerator. It needs to get cold again, and it also needs to allow the gluten to relax so that it stays nice and tender. So I am going to let this rest in the fridge for about 30 minutes. If you have to let it rest for longer for whatever reason, like you can't roll it out in 30 minutes, then you really should use plastic wrap, because parchment paper isn't awesome for keeping things moist. The plastic wrap will keep it nice and moist and prevent it from drying out. So I'm just going to pat this into a disc. Doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, you don't want to overwork it. And then I'm going to fold this up. Again, use plastic wrap if that's all you have, or if you can't roll this out in half an hour. And now this is going to go into the fridge, and then we'll come back and we'll roll it out, okay? Okay, so now what I'm going to do while the dough is resting in the refrigerator, I am going to slice the apples, and then we're going to make this really lovely mixture that we're going to brush on top of the apples. So you can use whatever apples you want. You really don't need that many. I'm just going to use 2 large ones. I like to use 2 different ones. It just gives a more interesting flavor. I'm going to use one green Granny Smith, which is a little more tart, and then this one is a Honey Crisp, which is one of my favorites. It's sort of a sweet tart, but use really whatever your favorites are. So I'm going to just slice the apples in half and then in quarters, and then I'm going to core them, and then we're going to slice them as thinly as we can. But what I want you to do is make sure when you're slicing them that you kind of keep the slices together, because it will be much easier to make a beautiful design on your galette. So just like that. And you'll take the apple and just really thinly, like that, like that, and just kind of see how I'm pinching this together, and that will help you keep all the slices together. Clearly my knives need sharpening. Okay, so I'm going to continue with this, and then I'll show you how to make the mixture that we're going to brush on top. Okay, one more cut. And there we go. So you see how I kept all these together? Now it's up to you if you want to use this little end that has kind of mostly skin. I usually choose not to, because I find these get a little bit tough. So I will end up just saving those for a snack for later. Now we have to make our mixture that we're going to actually brush on top of the apples. We want to get everything done before we start rolling out the pastry. Remember, keep everything cold. So we have some melted unsalted butter, to which I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. You can use grade A or grade B, up to you. Grade B has a little bit more maple flavor. And a little bit of vanilla extract, like 2 teaspoons. And then we're going to use about 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. So we're going to whisk this all together, and we'll set this aside so that it is totally ready. Okay, so whisk it until everything's well incorporated. All right. Got that ready, and then the last thing that you need to have ready is the ingredients for your egg wash. So I have 1 whole egg right here, 1 large egg, and a tablespoon of milk. If you want to use buttermilk, that's fine, or if you don't have milk, you can use water. And this is going to be brushed on the outside of the crust, and it gives it a really pretty golden color. It's really for looks. Otherwise, if you don't do an egg wash, your pastry is going to look a little bit on the dry and boring side. So I would recommend doing this. All right, so this looks nice and well beaten. Anything that you don't use for your pastry today, you can just incorporate into a scramble or an omelet tomorrow. All right, and then I also have a little bit of sugar, which we're going to sprinkle on the outside of the crust too, and it gives it really nice texture and tastes good too. I have one pan prepared right now and another one that I'll show you in the back. This is the ideal pan to make a galette, okay? Because it doesn't have any rims, so it's much easier to get the pastry on here. But I will show you what to use if you do not have a rimless baking sheet. I've lined this with parchment, and I'm gonna set this aside over here. If you don't have one of these, don't worry. You probably have one of these. This This is a large one though, okay? So don't use those little tiny ones. Just flip it over and you can put the parchment like this, and that way you can kind of like slide it off like so. Okay, so I'm gonna go get my pastry and then we're gonna start rolling it out, and then this thing's gonna go in the oven very, very soon. Be right back. Okay, so I'm back with the pastry. This has been chilling for about 30 minutes and it's time to roll this out. Do not stress about rolling out pastry. It is really not that hard. And I'm gonna show you a tip for getting it actually into your pie plate, or in this case, onto the baking sheet. So we're gonna take some flour and we're just gonna sprinkle it on the countertop, okay, so it doesn't stick. And if you have chilled this for longer than 30 minutes or longer than 60 minutes, this might be a little bit too cold to roll out. So just leave it on your countertop for 5 or 10 minutes until it starts to give a little bit when you roll it. Let me grab my rolling pin. And I'm gonna put a little bit of flour on this too, but don't put too much flour because you don't want the pastry to dry out. And then what you're gonna start to do is just to roll this in one direction from the inside out, like that. That's all. Now, you can see this is cracking a little bit because maybe it was in there a little bit longer than 30 minutes. No problem. Just start to pinch it together, okay, if you want this to be really, really perfect. And it's not that hard to do. Just use your fingertips, pinch it together like so, and then just keep rolling. Now you can see how the pastry can move around the countertop like that. That is ideal. You want to make sure it can always move around. So every so often, just give it a little twirl like that, and if it's sticking, just add a little bit more flour. That's all. So you can also see there's some nice little pieces of butter in here. Again, that's what we want. So this is going to be a nice flaky pastry. All right, so once I have this into about a 12-inch diameter, then we're good to transfer this to our prepared baking sheet. Okay, I'll keep pinching this so it's a little bit more perfect on the edges. Okay, roll from the center out, give it a little twirl. Maybe I'll add a little bit more flour to my rolling pin. And if you notice any thicker spots, then just concentrate on those areas. Okay. And I keep a ruler on hand for times like these when I have no idea if it's 12 inches or not. So keep it in my utility drawer and we'll just take a quick peek. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's see. 12 inches perfectly. How do I do it? I don't know. Well, I've made this a lot, but it's perfect 12 inches. Awesome. So what we'll do now is we are going to roll this onto the rolling pin like this, and then you'll just unroll it just like that. You can do this. It's not that hard. It's actually fun. Okay, we got to work quickly. If you feel like your pastry is starting to get warm and sticky, stick it in the fridge, just like this. You don't have to cover it or anything. Stick it in there for like 10 minutes or in the freezer even, because the worst thing is if this is warm. That is a problem. Now, take your apples. Remember I said I'm gonna discard those or eat those myself for later. And about 2 inches-ish from the edge, because you need to fold these edges up, you can start to make a pretty design. I'll be honest with you, I'm not much of an artist. I don't really have the patience to make food look like, you know, super professional, and who cares? It's just gonna taste amazing, so what does it matter? But I kind of like to do an arrangement like this, and then I'll put a few in the center. Okay, so even though it looks like, you know, we've got this green-red thing going on, a lot of times when the red ones are baked, their skins turn a little bit green too. So, you know, it doesn't really matter if you're trying to do any sort of a design. So we'll just keep arranging these in a circle and make sure you have enough for the center too. So I'll probably stick like this one. This looks like it fits very well in the center. Let's take some of these green ones and put these like this. Lovely. Use up all your space. And I have just enough. So we'll put a couple of these in there like that. And then I'll stick some of these over here because this looks like it could use a few more. Okay, so perfect. So our apples are arranged. And now I'm going to take this whole mixture and we're going to really liberally brush the apples with this delicious maple, butter, vanilla, cinnamon mixture. It's going to just flavor the apples perfectly. And it's really not that much sweetener in here. You've got a total of 2 tablespoons from the maple syrup. You've got a couple of teaspoons in the crust, and then, you know, a little bit that will sprinkle around the crust on the outside. I mean, that's not a lot. Now, I have still some more in here, and yes, I've brushed all the apples already. Keep going. Use up all of it because it will bubble up underneath the apples and it will be just so, so, so good. Okay, so let me finish doing this, and then, yum. We are now going to be putting on some flaky sea salt. This is if you want, which I do, because I love salt. And I think salt on desserts is actually super fun and super interesting. So this is the coarse Maldon flaky sea salt. It's used for like finishing, just, you know, vegetables and things like that, salads. But it's really yummy on chocolate chip cookies or on chocolates or on caramel. So we're just going to give this a little sprinkle. And you'd be amazed how delicious this is. It actually makes it taste a little sweeter. It's kind of interesting. So use it if you want, or don't. Okay, that's enough. Now let's pull up the sides of this galette like this. Again, if it feels really soft to you, it's never wrong to put this in the refrigerator. And just move them up the sides and give it a little fold like that. Not perfect, who cares? And we'll take another brush and then brush the sides. And you will have extra egg wash. So if you decide to double this and do 2 galettes, you don't need to double the egg wash. You'll have plenty for 2 galettes. And again, you can always use this in the morning for your scrambled eggs. There's nothing wrong with it. And then lastly, what we'll do before we pop this in the oven is we're going to just sprinkle this with a little sugar on the outside. I know, so not like me to do that, but it's just a little bit and it makes a big difference. So just a little right there on the crust. I think I've got about 2 teaspoons or so, maybe not even, half a tablespoon of sugar here. Maybe I'll use all of it, maybe I won't. I mean, that looks perfect to me. Voila. Okay, this is now ready to head into the oven, and we're gonna bake it at 375 degrees for approximately 50-ish minutes, maybe a little more. Okay, here we go. This smells so divine, and look how beautiful it is. It's nice and golden on the crust, which I can tell is gonna be nice and flaky. Got some of that little crunchy bits from the sugar. And I can just see that the filling is like bubbling a little bit. So this is really good to go. You can make this a few hours ahead of time if you want to. It's better that you do make it a little bit ahead just because you want the juices to kind of settle a bit. This has actually been sitting for maybe about 20 minutes. So I think I'm good to cut it. I like to use a nice long sharp knife, and you can just cut this into 1/8, or if you're feeling generous, into 6. But generally speaking, I don't usually try and cut this into anything smaller than 1/8. So I'll cut it right down the middle to start. And then to make really perfectly even slices, if you're gonna do 1/8, then you can cut it down the middle again and then cut those quarters in half. So we can do that, or maybe I'll cut it into 6ths because I'm feeling like a bigger piece today. So just kind of slice down the middle, and then you can slice these in half. And this is obviously delicious with a little vanilla or caramel ice cream, or you can even just do some like lightly sweetened creme fraiche. It doesn't really need anything at all. And you can also feel free to swap out the apples for pears or add in some fresh cranberries in the fall. This is also nice with stone fruit. So whatever's in season is great, but look at that. That is beautiful, and look at that nice flakiness in the crust. I can't help but just try one little bite here. You can see the apples too, the green color. You can't even tell which was red and which was green. So good. That salt, there's a little bit of that flaky salt and you're just like, what is that? It's so good. And the vanilla and maple syrup together, I'm telling you, this is a winner. Everybody's gonna love it. And I hope you try it. Okay,